All right, welcome everyone to the deep dive. Today we're going deep, as always, this time into, well, something you might not know a whole lot about probably, but that's what we do here. We're going to break down the Wollastonite market, specifically looking at what's projected for 2025. And to do that, we've got a report, a pretty in-depth one actually, called the Global Wollastonite Market Report 2025 by Cognitive Market Research. And our goal today, like always, is to take this kind of dense research and pull out the key insights, the stuff that's really going to give you, the listener, a solid understanding of where this market's at, where it's headed, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head there. It's not just about 2025 itself, right? That's our focal point. But we're also going to be looking ahead, using this report's projections all the way out to 2033. So think of this deep dive as like a high-level briefing almost.
Yeah.
We want to equip you with knowledge about the size of this market, the trends, what's driving the growth, all of that.
Okay, so let's get into it. Starting with the numbers. The report says that in 2025, the global Wollastonite market is projected to hit USD 268.92 million. So that's our starting point.
Yeah, what's really interesting is what they're projecting from there. By 2033, the market is expected to reach USD 543.75 million. So we're talking about more than doubling in size in just 8 years. That's huge growth, and it signals, I think, a real expanding market.
And the report quantifies this with the compound annual growth rate, that's the CAGR, which they estimate to be 9.20% between 2025 and 2033. What does that kind of growth rate actually tell us?
Well, a CAGR of 9.20% shows us a healthy, accelerating market. Basically means that, on average, the market is expected to grow over 9% each year. And a big driver of this, the report highlights, is the increasing demand from the polymer and rubber industries. I mean, think about how many products are made from those materials. Everything from like simple things we use every day all the way to like really specialized components.
Right, so we've got the big picture. Now let's zoom in a little bit, look at where this demand is concentrated geographically. The report gives a regional breakdown for, the projected market size in 2025 and their respective growth rates. And it looks like North America is leading the pack.
Yeah, North America is expected to hold the largest share of the market, over 40% of the global revenue, with a projected market size of USD 99.50 million in 2025. And it's not just a one-time thing. They're forecasting a pretty consistent CAGR of 8% from 2025 to 2033.
And when we look closer at North America, the USA, of course, is the biggest player. Any interesting takeaways about what's driving their growth?
Well, the U.S. market in 2025 is estimated to be USD 78.51 million. And their CAGR is projected at 7.8%, which is slightly lower than the overall North American rate, but still very solid. A big factor they're seeing is a growing need for lighter materials, especially in the aerospace and automotive industries, which makes sense, right? They're constantly looking for ways to improve fuel efficiency and performance, and Wollastonite can help with that.
Of course, Canada and Mexico are also part of this North American picture, each with their own unique situations.
Absolutely. So Canada's market is projected at USD 11.94 million for 2025. But what's notable is their CAGR, 8.8%, which is a bit higher than the U.S., and they're seeing increased use of Wollastonite in cold-resistant building materials, which again makes sense given their climate. Mexico, meanwhile, is at USD 9.05 million with an 8.5% CAGR, so also showing strong growth.
So moving on from North America, let's head over to Europe. They seem to be another major player in the Wollastonite market.
Definitely. Europe's projected to hold over 30% of the global market, with this size of USD 77.99 million in 2025. And they actually have the same CAGR as North America, 8%. But within Europe, there's a lot of variation in terms of like what they're using Wollastonite for and how fast those individual markets are growing.
Right, and the UK, for example, has a decent market size, and they're projected to grow pretty rapidly. What's driving that?
So the UK market is estimated at USD 13.10 million, with a CAGR of 8.8%. A big factor there is the growing use of like high-tech ceramics. So it seems like industries that need advanced materials are turning more and more to Wollastonite. And then you've got Germany, which is a really significant market in Europe.
Yeah, it looks like Germany's market is even bigger than the UK's. What are the main factors there?
Yeah, so Germany's projected to be at USD 15.44 million in 2025, with a CAGR of 8.2%. And one of the key drivers there is the demand for reinforced composites, particularly in their plastics and automotive industries. It's not surprising, right? Germany's known for its manufacturing, its focus on quality and durability, and Wollastonite can help them achieve that. And we can't forget about France, Russia, and Spain.
Right. France is projected to reach USD 7.17 million with the 7.2% CAGR, Russia at USD 12.09 million with 7%, and Spain at USD 6.39 million also with 7.1%. So it's interesting to see how those numbers vary, reflecting the different strengths and needs of each country's industries.
Yeah, and if we step back for a second, I think this really highlights how, even though we might not think about it much, a material like Wollastonite is really woven into the global economy. Different regions have different needs, different strengths, and that's reflected in how they use this material.
Okay, let's shift gears now and look at the Asia-Pacific region, or APAC. Seems like that's where we're seeing the fastest growth in the Wollastonite market.
Yeah, it is pretty remarkable. So in 2025, APAC is projected to hold about 23% of the market, with a size of USD 64.54 million. But their CAGR between 2025 and 2033 is projected to be 12.1%. That's way faster than what we're seeing in North America and Europe, so definitely a rapidly expanding market.
And the report dives into some of the specific countries driving this growth in APAC. China and India are two big ones that stand out.
Right, so China's the biggest player in APAC, with a projected market size of USD 27.11 million in 2025. And they're expected to grow at a CGR of 11.6%. Their growth is being fueled by a couple things, mainly. Their huge infrastructure projects, their rapid industrialization, those are driving demand for ceramics and construction materials which use Wollastonite. Then you've got India, starting from a smaller base of USD 6.45 million, but with an even higher CGR, 14%.
Wow, 14%. That's a rapid increase. What's behind that kind of growth?
It seems like a lot of it has to do with their agricultural sector, specifically the growing use of wollastonite as a soil conditioner. So yeah, not just industrial uses, but also applications in agriculture. And then Japan and South Korea are also big factors in APAC's growth.
Yeah, Japan's projected to hit USD 8.91 million with a CAGR of 10.6%, and South Korea's at USD 7.74 million with 11.2%. So it's really across the board in the Asia-Pacific region.
Exactly. There's just a ton of demand across different sectors in these fast-growing economies.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that the wollastonite market is booming there.
All right, now let's take a look at some of the other smaller but still important markets. For example, South America. They have a decent chunk of the global market.
Yeah, South America accounts for over 5% of global revenue, with a market size of USD 10.22 million in 2025. And their projected CAGR is 9.6%. The main players there are Brazil and Argentina.
Right. Brazil's market is projected at USD 4.37 million with a 10.2% CAGR, and Argentina's at USD 1.72 million with an even higher CAGR of 10.5%. What's driving the growth in those countries?
So in Brazil, it's mostly about their polymer and rubber industries.
Yeah.
They're seeing growth there, both for industrial uses and for the automotive industry. In Argentina, it's kind of like what we saw in India. They're using more and more wollastonite to improve their soil. So again, you see the range of applications for this material.
Okay, and then there's the Middle East and Africa. Smaller markets overall, but still showing potential for growth.
The Middle East is at about 2% of the global market share, with a size of USD 10.76 million in 2025. And their CAGR is projected at 9.7%. Key markets there are Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Turkey. In Qatar specifically, they're using more wollastonite in construction because it's fire resistant, which is important for them. And then Turkey, they're seeing growth in their metallurgical sector, which is driving demand.
And Africa, they're at about 1% of the global share with a projected market size of USD 5.92 million in 2025. And their CAGR is 8.9%. South Africa and Nigeria are the main markets there.
Yeah, so Nigeria is seeing a growing demand for ceramics, mostly because of housing development and urbanization. And then in South Africa, they're using wollastonite as a fluxing agent in metallurgy. Basically, it helps lower the melting point of other materials, which makes the process more efficient. So it's really interesting to see how these different markets, even the smaller ones, are finding their own specific uses for wollastonite.
So we've looked at the overall market, we've looked at the regions. Now let's talk about the types of wollastonite being used. The report breaks it down into natural and synthetic. What are the differences there and what's happening in those segments of the market?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty interesting dynamic. So right now, natural wollastonite holds the bigger share of the market.
Yeah.
That's because it has some great properties. It's mechanically strong. It's very pure. It's non-toxic. And it can even be used as a soil conditioner. And the main consumers of natural wollastonite are Asia Pacific and North America, which makes sense.
Right, they have those big industrial bases. But the report says that synthetic wollastonite is actually the fastest growing segment. Why is that?
Well, synthetic wollastonite has a couple of key advantages. First of all, you can engineer it to have specific properties. Like you can control the particle size, you can make sure it's super pure, and you can even enhance its mechanical strength. This makes it really attractive for industries like plastics, coatings, construction, automotive. They need those high-performance materials. Plus, there's a growing demand for lightweight materials and a push for eco-friendly options, and synthetic wollastonite can fit that bill too.
So even though natural Wollastonite is more common right now, synthetic Wollastonite seems poised to really take off because it can be customized and it meets the needs of these modern industries. Now, let's talk about applications. Where is all this Wollastonite actually being used? And it looks like ceramics is the biggest end-use sector.
Yeah, ceramics is definitely the biggest. Wollastonite is added to ceramics to make them stronger, to prevent them from shrinking too much during firing, and to make them more resistant to heat shock. And this is important for all sorts of ceramic products, from tiles and toilets to tableware and industrial ceramics. The growth in this sector is being driven by things like infrastructure development and urbanization, particularly in North America and the Asia-Pacific region.
Right, and then there's the plastic and rubber manufacturing sector. That's another big one, and it's growing fast. What does Wollastonite do for those materials?
So in plastics, Wollastonite makes them more dimensionally stable, it improves their resistance to heat, and it reinforces them, basically makes them stronger. So you can use it in a wide range of products, from consumer goods to building materials to automotive parts. In rubber, Wollastonite improves wear resistance, which is important for things like tires and seals. And this segment is being driven by the demand for lighter, higher-performing materials, especially in packaging and the automotive industry.
So besides ceramics and plastics, what are some other applications for Wollastonite?
Well, it's used in paints and coatings to improve durability and other performance properties. We talked about its use in metallurgy as a fluxing agent. It's also used in friction products like brake pads, and even in concrete manufacturing to improve certain properties. And then there's this catch-all category in the report called Others, which includes things like synthetic bone implants. It just shows you how versatile Wollastonite is.
Yeah, it's really amazing how Wollastonite is being used in all these different areas. Now, the report also talks about the factors driving the market's growth, as well as the factors that might hold it back. Let's start with the growth drivers.
Well, the biggest ones are the increasing demand from the ceramics and plastics industries. We've talked about those already. But also, the construction industry is using more and more Wollastonite as an additive for cement and in coatings. And then, of course, there's the automotive industry, which is always looking for lighter, stronger materials. So those are the main forces pushing the market forward.
And on the other side, what are some of the things that might slow down the market's growth?
The report says that competition from other materials is a big factor. Things like talc, calcium carbonate, kaolin. Sometimes those are just more readily available or they're cheaper for certain applications. And then the cost of processing and extracting wollastonite itself can be a bit of a barrier.
So basically, there's a lot of demand, which is good, but there are also these cost considerations and alternative materials that they have to compete with. Now, the report also mentions some important trends to watch out for. What should we be paying attention to?
One of the big ones is the focus on sustainability. More and more industries are looking for eco-friendly materials, and wollastonite, being a natural mineral, fits that bill. Another trend is the growing use of wollastonite in polymer composites and advanced plastics. That's being driven by the need for lighter weight and better performance. So it seems like those are going to be big areas for wollastonite going forward.
Okay, and finally, let's talk about the companies. Who are the big players in the Wollastonite market?
The report mentions a few key companies like Nordkalk Corporation, ACBM JSC, Wolcom, Emery's SA, RT Vanderbilt Holding Company, Inc., Lishu Danishan Wollastonite Co.'s Ltd., and Canadian Wollastonite. These companies are really driving the market forward. They're developing new products, they're forming partnerships, and they're expanding their production to meet the growing global demand.
And the report highlights some interesting recent developments involving some of those companies. Can you give us a couple examples?
Sure. So Canadian Wollastonite, they've announced a big plan to distribute their product to farms in Ontario and Quebec. This shows how they're expanding into the agricultural market. And the Nordkalk in Finland, they've developed a new method for recovering Wollastonite from their mining waste, which is really cool because it's more sustainable and it makes better use of resources.
So to wrap things up, it's pretty clear that the global Wollastonite market in 2025 is a dynamic and growing sector. The polymer and rubber industries are big drivers, and the Asia-Pacific region is leading the growth charge. We've got both natural and synthetic Wollastonite out there, each with their own strengths and uses. And the ceramics and plastics manufacturing industries are the biggest consumers.
Yeah, exactly. And while there are challenges, like competition from other materials and cost considerations, The overall demand for high-performance, sustainable materials is creating a positive outlook for Wollastonite. And I think what's really interesting is how different regions and industries are finding their own specific uses for this material. It's a great example of how something we might not think about much is actually playing a big role in the global economy.
So hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the Wollastonite market, what it looks like today, and where it's heading in the future. And it shows you that even a seemingly niche material can have a wide range of applications and be influenced by all sorts of global trends.
And that brings up an interesting question, something for you to think about. As we move towards a more sustainable future, and as Wollastonite continues to be developed and improved, where else might we see this material being used? What new applications will emerge? And what other seemingly ordinary materials might hold similar potential?
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. See you next time.
Take care.